Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video we're going to talk about Fino Sherry and Fino Sherry cask whiskeys. So we're going to begin this study with a bottle of Don Benigno Fino Sherry, but before we get into this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Fino Sherry and this wine. Fino Sherry is from the Jerez Triangle, the towns of Jerez, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and El Puerto de Santa Maria in Cadiz, Spain. Fino Sherry is made from the Palomino grape grown on the chalky Albariza soil. It is aged biologically under a veil of flor yeast for at least 2 years, but usually 4 to 7 years in a fractional blending system of casks known as a Solera. The Don Benigno Fino Sherry is bottled at 15% alcohol by volume and sells for about $11. So as you can see, it's sort of a pale straw in color on the nose. The wine is clean with actually some fresh fruit notes up front. Fresh pear, fresh peach, a little bit of fresh apple. Seems like a fresh pear apple that's just starting to be dried. So in my last video, I did a review of a Tío Pepe. This is fresher on the nose than the Tío Pepe, which means it's probably a younger wine. The Tío Pepe was probably 4 to 7 years old. I would estimate this one somewhere between 2 and 4 years old. So I get some fresh fruit as well as some dried fruit. There's that distinctive sherry, sort of salty sea breeze character to it. Some almonds. You get a little bit of that nuttiness, but it's fresher and more youthful than the Tío Pepe. Slight floral notes. Perhaps a little bit of tropical note as well. Maybe some dried pineapple. All right, on the palate. The wine is dry, but fruity up front. Get those sort of fresh and dried apples and pears, a little bit of peach. Right in the mid palate, it goes really salty. This is saltier than the Tío Pepe. It's got a moderate length finish. Now, these wines are 15% alcohol by volume. If this was a table wine, which is a normal typical wine that you typically would have with dinner, this would be a high alcohol, full-bodied wine. But in the category of fortified wines, this is actually sort of on the lower side of alcohol and I would say slightly lighter in body. So whether it's heavy alcohol, high alcohol, full-bodied, whatever else, it's in the context of the style, right? I mean, compared to a whiskey, this is very, very low alcohol, right? So this is actually, all things considered, a full-bodied, high alcohol wine, but the fact that it's in a fortified category, it puts it on the lower end. In comparison to port, Oloroso sherry, Madeira, and other fortified, Marsala, and other fortified wines. If you like white wines with your dinner or salads, particularly seafood, and maybe you typically have Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, or something like that, this is an excellent filler for that spot. A little higher in alcohol, of course, but that salty note, and there's maybe a little bit of a savory note and that almond character. It makes me want to immediately pick up something to eat. This would be absolutely fantastic with any fish or any chicken dishes, particularly if it's seafood. It just naturally pairs with that. It's an inexpensive wine, worth checking out. I would say the average consumer is probably going to go gear more towards this style of wine because it's fresher, more youthful, more fresh fruit character in comparison with the Tío Pepe. But your sherry aficionados, those who really like the distinctive characters of sherry, are going to go more towards the Tío Pepe. Now, I'm not trying to convert you into being a sherry lover, but I think, even if you don't totally get into rum, if you're going to learn about rum cask finished whiskeys, you should try your rum. If you're going to learn about red wine finished cask whiskeys, try red wine. If you're not a bourbon drinker and you prefer Scotch, you should try some bourbons to understand bourbon casks and what they're contributing to the flavor of the whiskeys that you like. So what is really important though is when we're trying Fino Sherry cask whiskeys is, do we get aromas and flavors from this cask that we can then pick up in the whiskey. The Tomatin 12-year-old Fino Highland single malt Scotch whiskey was distilled on the 15th of January in 2002. It was aged in American oak casks for 9 years before being transferred to first fill Fino Sherry butts on the 29th of June in 2011 for the final 3 years. It is bottled at 46% alcohol by volume and sells for about $65. So the primary thing we want to do in learning about Fino Sherry and sherry cask whiskeys is find out how is the wine reflected in the whiskey. Does the wine simply seem like it was just poured into the whiskey, so we're getting sort of a blend of wine and whiskey? Or do we find that the wine is actually getting lost in the whiskey so that it just seems like some strange amalgamation between the whiskey and some strange cask? Or is there a perfect harmony between the spirit from the still and the cask? So in the previous video I reviewed the Tobermory 12-year-old Fino Sherry cask whiskey, which is bottled at 55.1% alcohol by volume. This is at 46% alcohol by volume. But even if the two whiskeys were at the same ABV, Tomatin is known as being a gentler dram. And they're not talking about lower ABV necessarily, because they have cask strength as well. There's texturally something unique about Tomatin that just gives it a more velvety and silky texture. So visually, it definitely looks like a Fino Sherry cask. Really golden in color on the nose. I get some nice, I would say, dried fruit character, canned fruit character, peaches, pears, golden apples. But there's that definitive Fino Sherry cask, almond paste or marzipan, sort of a slight salty character. There's some vanilla, lighter caramels. There's sort of a dry, dusty, peanutty character as well. Some sultanas, golden raisins, a little bit of like a butterscotch character as well on the palate. As I said, it's a really soft, silky, velvety texture, almost oily in nature. It reminds me a little bit of some Irish whiskeys. It is sweet up front, remains fairly sweet all the way through about to the back of the palate, and then it goes dry. Up front, I'm getting golden delicious apples, canned pears, a little bit of peach. 3/4 of the way back, the Fino Sherry cask says hello. You get a little bit of that nuttiness, dryness, hint of salty character. Get a little bit of that butterscotch, and it's a really nice richness on the back end. So it starts off sweet and finishes dry and maintains this really lovely silky texture all the way through. The Tobermory 12-year-old Fino Sherry cask whiskey is much more bolder, complex. It has more depth and breadth, but it's also $100 more per bottle. This is a really lovely whiskey, particularly for this price. If you want to explore Fino Sherry cask whiskeys, get to understand the nature of Fino Sherry cask and whiskeys, I would say this is an excellent option, particularly considering the budget. Don't get me wrong, the Tobermory 12-year-old is a superior whiskey, but you're paying another $100 for it, and there is fewer bottles available. This one's really, really nice, and I've seen it on more shelves than the Tobermory. What would I give in terms of a score? I'm going to go a solid 89 points. A solid 89 points. I gave the Tobermory 12-year-old Fino cask 92 points. What's the difference in terms of quality? I would say it's the depth and breadth of the character to it. I would say there's more elegance, more refinement to the Tobermory, but this is an absolutely lovely gem. Really, 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 really nice. If you've never had a Fino Sherry cask whiskey, this is one I'm going to highly, highly recommend. I have 3 bottles of it. I like this one so much. I bought a couple more. Alrighty, that's it for this review. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, but you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I go live, and if you are one of my Patreon supporters, I want to thank you very much. Until next time, cheers. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.